Thank you very much. Auditory neuroscience sounds glamorous until you realise that in fact it just meant I spent a year of my life in a soundproof room listening to about 20,000 clicks. And if you think that was bad, I had a friend whose brother was doing a PhD in chemical engineering sponsored by Hovis, and he spent the entire Christmas holiday counting bubbles in micrograph slides of slices of bread. So that's what it's actually like doing a PhD. But thank you for coming. Thank you particularly if you come despite being provoked or angered by the title. I'm sorry, it is quite a cheeky title tonight. What if atheism is bad science? It's meant to be provocative. I actually think it is bad science, and I'll try and say that later. But it's a kind of reply, I suppose, to the more common allegation that Christianity is bad science. In fact, you can't really be a Christian if you want to be a scientific person. And this is my kind of reply to that. But certainly when I was an undergraduate, when I was 18, going up to study natural science at Cambridge, I was very sceptical about Christians and about any idea they could possibly be rational at all. And I even expressed my contempt for them in a poem that I wrote. Now you have to understand that I was a science student, not an English student, and so my poem is not very good, but I do still remember it. And it goes like this. Some people seem to find it odd that people grow from tiny cells. Pathetic, those who think of God and still drop coins in wishing wells. There we are. That was my contribution to English literature. But the idea of it, I thought, yeah, it must just be that there's some people who don't understand biology. The idea that we come from cells, and it must just be magic to them. Because sure, people used to believe that God made it rain with a great watering can in the sky. But then we came to understand about evaporation and condensation and the water cycle. People used to think that you got ill because of demons and you got better because of miracles. But now we understand about viruses and antibodies and helper T cells and so on. And we can explain it. Surely nowadays, now we've put people on the moon, now we've sequenced the human genome, it's time to grow out of these superstitions. And people who are still stuck believing in God, I thought they must just be like the people on holiday in Cornwall who throw their money into a well, make a wish, and honestly expect tomorrow to turn out differently because of it. And they don't realise, as of course I know, that the council just comes along once a week and clears the well out. About a month after writing that poem, I became a Christian and stopped writing poetry, so I can't give you another side of it. But and it's a long story, but part of it was that I met Christians at university who didn't fit my stereotype of religious people. I never would have been this rude to their face, but I basically thought that Christians were gullible hypocrites. I thought they were gullible because I'd never heard anyone give me a serious reason why I should believe it. And I thought they were hypocrites because I knew the same scandals that you know about of priests in the media and so on. But I met Christians in Cambridge who were neither of those things. They weren't gullible. They were, some of them, much more intelligent than me, and certainly much more thought through about life and the world. And they weren't hypocrites. They genuinely tried to follow the teaching of Jesus in their life in a way that I found very intriguing. And that kind of got me thinking, and then at the end of a long process, I became a Christian. At that point, I became something that the atheist says you can't be. I became a both-and person. A Christian now, and a scientist, or at least a science student. And I went on to do more science later. And the atheists always want to say it really has to be either or. So either you're going to be a rational, scientific, logical, fact-based person, in which case the assumption is you'll be an atheist, or if you really must, if you insist on it, then you can be a follow your imagination and your dreams in a kind of floaty, non-testable, anti-scientific way, and you can be a Christian. But you certainly can't be logical and Christian. That just doesn't work. It's got to be either or. And the first thing I want to say this evening is I want to challenge that either or, because there are too many both and people. I say I was a kind of both and, although I was a very junior scientist. But you may know that many of the great household names of science were also both and people. They were scientists and they were believes in God, in Jesus Christ. So let's do a bit of audience participation, see if you know what some of these people are famous for. So start with an easy one. Isaac Newton. Just shout out if you know. I think everyone knows this one, so don't be shy. Isaac Newton. Gravity. People think I'm scared of getting it wrong. It'd be really embarrassing. But gravity, yeah. Michael Faraday. Electromagnetism, electricity, yeah. Louis Pasteur. Pasteurization. So he came up with a hypothesis that the reason that milk goes off is because of little microbes that are too small to see with the naked eye. So before he could see one with the microscope, he hypothesized maybe there were invisible little organisms, and of course we now know that there are, called bacteria. I once said Louis Pasteur, and someone in the audience said milk. No, he didn't invent milk, but he did invent pasteurization. What about Charles Babbage? Harder one. The first mechanical computer, you can see a reconstruction of it in the Science Museum in London. Johannes Kepler. Planetary motions, yeah. Robert Boyle, anyone doing chemistry? A-level chemistry, Boyle's gas laws. All these people, some of the leading scientific minds of their day, were all committed followers of Jesus Christ. And you might say, well, that's just because they lived back then, 200, 300 years ago. That's what everyone believed back then. But according to at least one very influential historian of science, Sir Alfred North Whitehead, there's actually more of a connection like that. Sir Alfred North Whitehead wrote, people became scientific because they looked for law in nature. But the reason they looked for law in nature was because they believed in a lawgiver. In other words, it was their conviction that there was a divine intelligence, a mind behind the world that made them expect to find the world intelligible. That's why they went looking for law in the first place. Had people believed in the 16th, 17th century what many people today believe, that the world is entirely accidental and random, it's questionable whether they would have put such effort into trying to understand what they expected to be random. They didn't expect it to be random, they expected it to be intricate and intelligible because it was created by an intelligence. So arguably it was out of a Christian worldview that science emerged in the West. Well, you might say, okay, but those are ancient scientific names. What about more recently? We've made great strides forward in the last century. I became a Christian about February, March, I think, of my first year. Went along to church in Cambridge, sat next to somebody with a beard that looked rather professorial. And sure enough, turned out that it was Professor Bob White, the professor of geophysics at Cambridge University. It turns out he's one of the leaders of the church. That was a surprise to me. My next door neighbour in college was studying geology as well, and he was supervised by Professor Simon Conway Morris, the paleontologist, and it turned out he was also a Christian. That's interesting, isn't it? Because people say to you that you can't believe in the Bible because of the fossils and the dinosaurs, and yet Professor Simon Conway Morris knows more about fossils than almost anyone else on the planet, and somehow he manages to be a both-and person. He also believes in the Bible. Or what about the field of genetics? One of my best friends in London is now the professor of evolutionary genomics at Queen Mary University and is a devoted Christian. He knows more about evolutionary biology than most of us do. All of us do probably. Yeah, most people in the country do. And yet he's a Christian. Or what about quantum mechanics? Another one of my friends, he was by far my most intelligent friend at Cambridge. He became a professor, I think, at Imperial age, about 35. He's now in his early 40s and the head of department of material science. I remember having a sort of inkling, he was just my mate, but I had an inkling that he wasn't quite normal. When during my PhD I was in a choir, and some of the other faculty were in the choir, and I met the professor of physics at York, and he said, I'm off to Cambridge next week. I said, I know someone there, but he's just a PhD student, you won't know him. He said, what's his name? I said, he's called Peter Haynes. And the guy raised his eyebrows and said, I've heard about Peter Haynes. And he shot to professorship really early, and he's a committed Christian. In fact, he organised a week like this one when we were at Cambridge together. And all I want you to notice at this point is it doesn't seem to be automatically either or. Of course, I'm not saying that every scientist is automatically a Christian. We can all point to atheist scientists as well. But it doesn't seem to be it's one or the other, because quite often, too often for that hypothesis, it's both and. And here's my suggestion as to why that is. It is that way because there is nothing about science that contradicts with Jesus or the Bible. That's my claim. You can test it afterwards in question time, but I really think that's true. There's nothing in science that contradicts the teaching of Jesus Christ or the Bible. That is, as long as you're objective about what science is. So you can define science atheistically, so that the only thing you count as being scientific presupposes atheism, but then you've just smuggled in your conclusion at the beginning of the question. Let's be more objective. I mean, what is science? It's just a methodology whereby you observe the world, you formulate a hypothesis to describe what you've observed, and then you try and test that hypothesis to verify it or falsify it by experiments. There's nothing about that methodology that means you have to be an atheist to use it. The first people to use it weren't atheists. Many people today who use it are not atheists. In fact, we use the same methodology irrespective of what we believe. So in a scientific laboratory, when you publish a paper in a journal, you don't even have to say your religious affiliation. By the way, this experiment was done by a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or an atheist. It's just irrelevant because we're using the same methodology. It's not an intrinsically atheistic methodology. Nor do I know anything that's been discovered by that methodology, the results of science, that contradict Jesus or the Bible. I just don't think there is a conflict there at all. But fairly obviously there is some kind of conflict. Otherwise, why is it such a contentious issue? Why are you here this evening? Why is Richard Dawkins such a YouTube superstar? There is a conflict somewhere. I want to suggest that actually the conflict is not between science and Christianity, but between atheism and Christianity. And please don't mistake atheism for science. Science is just a methodology that all of us use, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, atheist. And here are two belief systems that people bring to their science. The belief system of Christianity on the one hand, the belief system of atheism on the other. People get annoyed when I describe atheism as a belief system, but of course that's what it is. It's a worldview, a philosophy. It's something that you can trust by faith if you think that the evidence is strong enough. And I want to, in what time it remains, I want to describe these two belief systems and then do what any scientific person should do and ask which one makes most sense of the evidence. That's the plan. Now, of course, there are other belief systems beside these two. I'm not going to go into Islam or Hinduism for now, just for the sake of time. I think these are the two that often go head to head, and it's probably why you're here tonight. Ask me about other ones later if you want. So firstly, atheism, or naturalism, as it's sometimes called by the philosophers. Naturalism is the philosophy that says matter and chance are all that there is. So in the words of Bertrand Russell, the great British philosopher, mankind is nothing but a chance collocation of atoms on a minor speck of interstellar dust. Now, as a scientist, of course, I agree with him that we are made of atoms. I also agree with him that the Earth is a relatively small planet in an average solar system on the edge of a huge galaxy with billions of stars. But the key words for Bertrand Russell, and these are the words that take you much further than the science into his philosophy or his faith, is that we are no more than. Those are the key words. No more than. We are reducible to matter and chance. Or in the words of Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist, every living being was born without reason, prolongs itself out of weakness, and dies by chance. Doesn't sound like ever so much fun, does he, to have round for dinner? But it's kind of brutally honest about their philosophy. We started randomly, we'll end randomly, and we just prolong ourselves out of we're too weak to do anything else but pass our DNA on. That's naturalism. Or in my own field of neuroscience, Francis Crick, who got the Nobel Prize for working out the structure of DNA, went on into neuroscience later in his career. He says in his book, The Astonishing Hypothesis, he puts it in inverted commas because he's not sure how much the concept of personhood really makes sense, but you, the apparent you, your joys and your sorrows, your sense of personal ambition and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. Now again, as a scientist, I agree with him that your thoughts are bound up with the movement of electrons in your head. But again, the key words are no more than. For the atheist, we are reducible to that. There's nothing more than our physical selves. And that view of the world is very much at odds with the Christian view of the world. There's a huge contradiction between what that says and what the Bible says. And I want to ask the question, let's look at the science and see which one fits better. So to give you the Christian view, rather than give it to you in my own words, I thought I'd give it to you from the Bible. So here's an excerpt from a speech that the Apostle Paul, one of Jesus' personally appointed representatives, gave in first century Athens. Athens back then was the kind of intellectual capital of the day. It was like the equivalent of Harvard or Yale or somewhere. And Paul, we're told, got speaking to some Epicurean philosophers. Now, I looked up Epicureanism in a dictionary, and basically the Epicureans thought that life was essentially random and there was no survival beyond the grave. So in some ways, the Epicureans thought some similar things to modern-day atheists. Not in every way, but in lots of ways the same. And this is how Paul explains the Christian message over and against that atheist worldview. And I've got it printed out for you on these white sheets. You might want to follow along. A little excerpt from a speech made in the first century. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. He marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's actually not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. It means to change their minds. We'll read to the end a bit later. Here's a little excerpt. I wonder if you can see, actually, just from the first two sentences of that speech, that atheism and Christianity are really opposites of each other. Let me explain what I mean. If you said to Richard Dawkins, does God exist? He would say no. Well, actually, he'd say probably not, which is, I think, just a more sophisticated way of saying no. But if you said to Richard Dawkins, does Christianity exist? He'd say, well, of course it does. I'm not ignorant about this global movement where 1 billion people worship someone called Jesus Christ, believing him to be God. Ah, Richard Dawkins, can you explain then where Christianity came from? Of course. People made it up, he would reply. So for the atheist, random chance produces human beings and human brains, and then human brains produce the idea of God. So chance made us, and we made God. And Paul wants to say in the Bible, it is exactly the opposite. God invented us. We are figments of his imagination, except because he's God, he doesn't just have to think things, he can actually create the things he's thinking of. And he gives us life and breath and everything. So there's the options, aren't there? Is God, in inverted commas, is God an invention of human beings, and we ourselves are an invention of chance, or are we an invention of God because he is some kind of incredibly powerful, personal, intelligent being who intended us? Those are the options. They're kind of opposites. And let's look at the science and say which one makes most sense. I'm going to compare them in 3 ways, and then I'm done, and you can ask me whatever questions you want. So here are the 3 ways we're going to compare them. The first one is the most contentious. We're going to compare them with respect to design. Now, this is a very contentious word because, of course, the atheist does not believe that the world was designed. It's just an accident. But everyone at least agrees that the universe has the appearance of design. In fact, the astronomer Sir Fred Hoyle once said that the idea of random chance coming up with life as we know it just seemed to him extraordinarily unlikely. And he compared it to the hypothesis that a whirlwind passed through a junkyard and left behind a fully assembled, functioning 747. I mean, it's kind of theoretically possible, isn't it, that all the bits of the aircraft should kind of blow together in this particular storm so that they could then be flown to New York. But it just really is not intuitively the most obvious explanation of how it came about. But according to the atheists, we have an explanation for that. The apparent design can be explained away simply by natural selection or evolution. Here is a quote from Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker, which was sort of an earlier book of Dawkins, which was required reading for me when I went up to university. And he says this: design, again he puts it in inverted commas because he's not sure about the concept, but design is only apparent, he writes. We have a mechanism to account for it, natural selection, the blind, unconscious, automatic process, which we now know is the explanation for the existence of and apparently purposeful form of all life, has no purpose in mind. It has no mind, no vision, no foresight, no sight at all. If it can be said to play the role of watchmaker in nature, it is that of the blind watchmaker. End of quote, and hence the title of the book. In other words, what you think is design is just a trick played on you by your DNA and by evolution. It looks designed, even though actually it was random and unguided and purposeless. Now, I don't want to get into, you can ask me later, I don't want to get into the whole debates about evolution and so on, except to say, even if you accept that the mechanism of natural selection is all that you need to get from a single-celled ancestor billions of years ago to a self-conscious, self-aware human being sitting in this room, and it's worth saying that goes hugely further than anything that's been remotely demonstrated in the laboratory. But even if you accept that, you still got a problem, because even to get natural selection started, you first have to have an information-carrying, self-replicating molecule. The simplest we know of is RNA, which in itself is one of the most complex molecules known to chemistry. And you have to have the information on that RNA, the first bit of RNA, capable of building even the simplest self-replicating cell, which is vastly complex. You've got to get that even before you can have any natural selection. So you can't explain that with evolution, because that's got to be there before you can have evolution. And actually your problems get even bigger, because you've also got to have a universe for the RNA to exist in. And that for the atheist really does start to get very difficult. I'm going to explain that in two ways. Firstly, the fact that there is a universe at all is very difficult for the atheist to explain. Because if there was a Big Bang, what made the Big Bang go bang? It's an argument known as the Kalam cosmological argument, Kalam, K-A-L-A-M, which I always like because it sounds like a Marvel franchise sort of the thing when someone punches someone, Kalam, Kapow, or whatever. But anyway, it's Kalam, I think after a philosopher. It basically says this: everything that began to exist has to have a cause. And the universe, we now think, began to exist, and so the universe needs to have a cause. Or to put it another way, science just needs to explain things that change. It doesn't have to explain things that don't change. If I said, like, why is that TV monitor still there? It's not a very interesting question. It's there because it was there, and it was there because it was there before that. No one's moved it, nothing's happened to it. Whereas if I said, how come this bit of paper is suddenly over there? It's not an enormously interesting scientific question, but it requires some kind of explanation. If I just said, it just is, it just sort of appeared there, that wouldn't really satisfy intellectual curiosity. There's got to be an explanation for the bit of paper didn't used to be there and now is there. And actually the explanation is obvious. I put it there, right? But the same applies to the universe. So people used to think, sort of 200 years ago, that the universe was eternal. So it's always been there. So if you say, why is the universe here? Well, it's here because it was here. Or why was it here? Well, it was here because it was here before that. You don't have to explain things that haven't changed. Whereas now the scientific consensus is, with good evidence behind it, that the universe began in the finite past. And so the question is, what made it begin? What's the cause of the change from not a universe to a universe? And the atheist doesn't know. And the Christian says, well, God's the cause. God made the Big Bang go bang because God made a universe. And then the atheist says, oh yeah, but you just pushed the question back a step, haven't you? Because who made God? And the answer is no one made God, because God's eternal. You don't have to explain things that haven't changed. God's here because he was here, and he was here because he was here before that. An infinite, eternal God doesn't need explaining, but a finite universe really does. It's not just, though, that the universe went bang, it's that it went bang at exactly the right speed. The inflationary view of the Big Bang, the author is a guy called Alan Guth. He's not a Christian, but he explains that at the very beginning of the universe, the rate of expansion has to be exactly right. If the universe expanded too quickly, all you would have would be hydrogen atoms, hydrogen nuclei, with billions of miles of space in between each one. You'd have no stars, no other elements beside hydrogen, certainly no planets or human beings. On the other hand, if the universe expanded too slowly, then gravity would get the better of it, and it would begin to expand and then get sucked back in on itself under the force of gravity. And you get a big bang and then a big crunch, a universe, and then no universe again, even before you got to 1 nanosecond on your stopwatch. It turns out to have any kind of universe that has stuff bigger than hydrogen and that lasts for longer than a nanosecond, the rate of expansion has got to be exactly right. And they calculate it's got to be correct within 1 part in 10 to the 40, which is not very likely. If you want an analogy, it's like taking a continent the size of America, covering it with 5-penny pieces tessellated, stacking them to a height of the distance between here and the moon, 380,000 kilometers away, doing the same for a billion other continents the same size, painting one of the 5 pences red with nail varnish, blindfolding your boyfriend, getting him to pick one at random. That's about 1 in 10 to the 40. In other words, it is very, 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 very unlikely. And the atheist has to say, well, it just got lucky. And I want to say that's too lucky. Something that extraordinary demands a better explanation. For example, somebody picked the numbers. God made the Big Bang go bang at the right speed to have planets and stars and helium and carbon and people and so on. And he made the DNA, and he put the information on the DNA for building extraordinarily complicated human beings. And he gave us self-awareness and an intelligence and an ability to understand ourselves and the rest of it. But for the atheist, you've only got randomness to do all the explaining for you. And it really, really struggles. In fact, the atheist knows this. These are not special Christian numbers I'm using, by the way. These are mainstream physics numbers. And the atheist knows there are problems. So the latest comeback is to say, well, maybe there's a multiverse. Maybe there are infinitely many universes simultaneously existing. Because if you do the experiment infinitely many times, then one of them will get lucky by chance. But the interesting thing about the multiverse is that it is not an observable or a repeatable or a testable theory. So in the proper sense of the word, it can't really be called a scientific theory. You can't ever check it. It's just a faith position, a philosophy to account for the data that science gives us. So you've got a choice. You've got to believe in something. You could believe in a multiverse, or you could believe in a God. It doesn't seem to me that a belief in a God is intrinsically less logical. In fact, multiverse starts to really do your head in, doesn't it, after a while? Because if everything that exists in this universe also exists in an infinite other number of universes, in every possible combination, then there's no point in ever being surprised by anything, is there? Because as well as the version of the universe where David is sitting in that chair there, there's also the universe currently simultaneous where David is sitting in that chair there, and Ollie is sitting in that chair there. And there's the universe where he's sitting 1 millimeter to the right and 1.5 millimeters to the right and 2 millimeters to the right. Every one of those universes simultaneously existing. There's the universe at which you won at Monopoly last week and with a hotel on Park Lane, and the universe in which your sister won with a hotel on Mayfair, and the universe in which Monopoly hadn't been invented, and the universe at which I drop dead now. So it's not that one if you're hoping that the talk would end. But everything that is happening to us is also not happening to us in every possible combination somewhere in the multiverse. And so there's no point in even asking why, and you can't even think anymore. That seems to me quite a problematic faith position. Or there's a God. He's eternal. He made everything. He made the Big Bang go bang at just the right speed. He put the information into the RNA, the DNA. He made human beings capable of being self-aware and so on. It seems to me a much better fit, actually, for the data, a much more plausible hypothesis. Second thing, I'll be briefer, the second and the third. Secondly, which one makes most sense of human life? Now, don't mishear me here. I'm not saying that Christianity must be true because it's nicer, although it really is nicer. Nice things aren't necessarily true, sometimes bleak things are true. I just want to challenge the atheist who's comfortable in his or her position and yet does not live in a way that is consistent with their position. We've talked already at lunchtimes about how Jesus couldn't stand hypocrisy in religious people. Maybe you hate religious hypocrites, and you're in good company because Jesus couldn't stand it. When people said they believed something, but then they didn't live according to it, Jesus had no time for that. But what I never realized as an atheist was that I was a hypocrite, because I was saying that I believed that the world was entirely random, and I was living as though it wasn't. There's a guy called John Gray, who was the professor of European thought at the London School of Economics. And he wrote a book called Straw Dogs, in which he has a go at atheists. He's not a Christian, he believes in some kind of Mother Earth Gaia thing, but he has a go at atheists for failing to follow their beliefs due to their logical conclusion. And he writes, "We must accept that our species is no different from any other in being a lucky throw in the cosmic lottery. As such, we live in a universe that is deaf to our music and as indifferent to our hopes as our sufferings and our crimes." It's quite profound, that, I think. He's saying if the world really is random, then the universe does not care about your suffering. It's just random. It's just the way that the atoms of the universe bumped into one another billions of years after it began by chance. And nor does the universe care about your crimes, because good and evil don't really make sense. They're just arbitrary labels that you give to random numbers. I remember when I was doing my PhD, I used to get a hard time for being the Christian in the department, mostly in a sort of fun, bantery kind of way. And I want to describe one conversation I had with one of the professors. And you must understand, as backdrop, that we were friends and this was banter. This is very important to remember. I said to her one day, I said, "Kate, I don't understand why, if you're right about the world, why killing you would be wrong." I appreciate, with hindsight, that sounds quite chilling, doesn't it? But it was banter, right? Why would killing you be any different to cutting a grapefruit in half for my breakfast? Because all I would be doing in both cases is rearranging the atoms of the universe in a slightly different way. Kate atoms, grapefruit atoms, I mean, much the same kind of proportion of carbon and so on. What's the difference? Just increasing the entropy of the grapefruit or of you. And she thought about it for a moment, and she said, "The difference, Andrew, is my mother would be upset." But then I said to her, "But Kate, what is upset?" Upset is just the decrease of the concentration of serotonin in the randomly assembled collection of atoms, which is your mother's brain. Why does that matter? And she couldn't give me a reason why it mattered. Now, of course, she knows it matters. I'm not saying that Kate was an immoral person. She's a lovely person. She cared about people, cared about me. It's just that she was believing something about herself and about the world that wasn't matched by how she lived. Well, people said, "Well, yeah, but can't you explain it because we've evolved to care? So it's part of the trick our DNA has played on us." Yeah, but the trouble is that apparently caring boils down to something that doesn't care. So sociology is just the behavior of lots of brains together in the same room. So really the budget from the sociology department ought to go to the neuroscience department. But then brains are just collections of chemicals, so the budget of the neuroscience department ought to go to the chemistry department, and then, of course, they always trump you, don't they? Chemicals are just the way they are because of the behavior of subatomic particles, and so all the budget ought to go to the physics department so they can build another big tunnel somewhere in Switzerland and hit things against each other really, really hard. But sociology boils down to atoms that don't care. The personal reduces to the impersonal. And you can't give grounds for anything that you care about. Whereas, on the other hand, if there's a God, It makes sense that we're personal because we're made by God who's personal. He's made us in his image. It makes sense that we're moral because we're created by a God who's moral. It makes sense that we have the hunch that human life is precious and that love is beautiful because there's a God who is generous in giving life and loves us very, very much. See, the things in our experience become grounded in the world. It's a good fit for the philosophy. And atheism is quite a bad fit, I want to suggest. So firstly, design. Secondly, who are we? Where do we fit into the world? Can we explain the things that we think are most important? And then lastly, the person of Jesus Christ. Let me look again at that speech that Paul gave. Verse 27, halfway down. God did this, God controlled where we live and our lives, so that we would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far from every one of us. In him we live and move and have our being. So God, this is an extraordinary thought, isn't it? And this was certainly far from my mind as an atheist starting to look into Christian things. The God that made us, says the Bible, also wants to know us. And what would that even mean? I thought God was some kind of equation. No, God's a person. Not a material person, not made physically of stuff, but he is personal. And he wants to know us as people. He made us to know him. Now, but here we're a bit stumped, are we, in terms of experiments? Because although science is powerful, science cannot tell you everything that is important. Please hear me again on this. Science is important, it's powerful. It cannot tell you everything that's important. I had the privilege of being at a debate with Peter Atkins. Was professor of chemistry at Oxford and is an outspoken atheist, and a little bit of it went on the BBC, so it was quite exciting. But Professor Atkins, he said in his talk that a rational person should not accept anything except that which could be proved by experiment. And I thought that was an astonishing thing to say. And I asked him, put my hand up for questions, and said, Professor Atkins, can you tell me who was speaking at the podium before you were? And he could, and so could we. There's about 300 witnesses there, all of us knew. I said, but Professor Atkins, I find that I'm unable to verify this by scientific experiments. He didn't leave any DNA. He didn't touch anything. Now, of course, the point being, yes, science is powerful, but there are other ways of knowing things, right? And 300 witnesses all watching is pretty good evidence. But particularly when it comes to personal relationships, science gets out of its depth pretty quickly, doesn't it? So imagine you wanted to get to know me, and maybe after this talk you don't really, but imagine you did, and all you have to go on is what you could find out by scientific experiments, and I submit myself to your research. What could you find out? You could do gas chromatography under my armpit. You could work out what deodorant I'm wearing and whether it's equal to this slightly stressful experience I find myself undergoing right now. You could do DNA fingerprinting and work out whether I'm related to anyone on the Interpol database, most wanted, or whether I'm likely to die young from any known genetic illness, and I am. Both my father and my grandfather had premature heart attacks. You could analyse the fibres on my shirt and find out where I've sat, and it's about all you could tell. I mean, you wouldn't, for example, be able to find out my name, or really anything of significance to me as a person. Who I love, what makes me laugh, what makes me cry, what I would die for. I mean, the most fundamental things about me as a person is not that science isn't useful. It just can't tell you everything that's important. I mean, it's why I very much doubt if you're in a relationship right now that on your first date you said, please can I take a small scratch of cells from the inside of your cheek? I'll run some tests and I'll be back with an answer in a couple of weeks. It's just not how it works, is it? You've got to get to know someone. And that's just with another person in this university. But what about if you were trying to get to know the God that made us, who's everywhere? I mean, how would you even exclude him from the apparatus to take a null reading as a control? Excuse me, God, please could you leave the universe and we can just check the difference in the experiments. We'd be stuffed, except that God has decided to make himself known to us in the most amazing way. And let's look at the end of the speech. that little break halfway down. Therefore, since we're God's offspring, we shouldn't think the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. It means to change their minds. Because he set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he's appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. And of course, that man is Jesus Christ, who is going to be the judge of the whole world, says Paul. Now, this was such a surprise to me when I first discovered verses like this in the Bible, because I always thought that science was about facts and religion was just about closing your eyes and believing something that you would like to be true. I was not expecting to find evidence words like proof in conjunction with Christian belief. It was just a shock to me. It's just a category surprise. But according to the Bible, God has come into the world 2,000 years ago to introduce himself, that we might know him, that we might realize that it's not that we make God like a little silver or gold statue in a temple somewhere, but that God made us and gives us life and breath and everything. And he came with a message of rescue. We've been looking at that at lunchtimes, how we've got a problem we can't fix, but he can fix it. More about that in the next couple of days if you're able to join us at lunchtime. And he came with miracles to authenticate his claims. Didn't just say, I'm from God, but he did extraordinary things. And of course, the most extreme miracle of all was he was killed, and 3 days later he was alive again, physically. People saw him and witnessed it. Now, I looked at the resurrection of Jesus in the God Delusion. I read the whole thing, but I just checked the index the other day. And I discovered there's one reference to it. And Richard Dawkins says, the resurrection of Jesus cannot have happened, being by definition a contradiction of the laws of science. And I want to say that isn't how science works, Professor Dawkins. You don't decide your theory first and then reject contrary evidence. In fact, contrary evidence is the reason for most advances in the history of science. Something doesn't quite fit, and you've got to revise your theory to take account of it. What he really means, actually, of course, is that the resurrection of Jesus doesn't fit with his faith position of atheism. Because if there is no God, and the world is just random, and all there is matter governed by the fixed laws of physics, then you can't have a resurrection. Sure, that's right. If you're right about the premises, that's true. But what if you got the whole premise of the universe wrong? What if there is a God of such power that he made the universe? He made the Big Bang go bang at exactly the right speed, and he made human beings. And actually the laws of science are mere descriptions of the orderly way in which he likes to work. God's very consistent, and so you can describe his work even in a mathematical way. But there'd be nothing to stop that God, if he wanted to, at one point in history, really to get your attention, to mess with the universe and the laws of physics and biology. In fact, what better way to do it? I mean, to do something nobody else could ever do, like walk on water at room temperature, feed 5,000 people with a few bread rolls, heal blind people by touching them, come back from the dead. So I used to think that miracles were a problem for the Christian. And now I think, well, miracles are, of course, entirely consistent, if that's true. And if atheism's true, then they don't work, they don't fit. And so what the scientifically minded person needs to do is not pre-decide whether there are miracles, but look at the evidence to see if there was one. Did Jesus Christ rise from the dead? It's not typical, and biologically that's not normally what you observe in the laboratory, but was there an exception to what you observe in the laboratory? Was there one man who did come back from the dead? Because if there was, then really this theory of atheism has to go. You can't account for it. And only an understanding of the world made by a powerful, intelligent, personal God can fit. And it turns out a God who wants to know us. A God who wants us to seek out and find him. But a God who commands us to stop our ignorance. Demands that we turn back to him before the day of judgment. And of this he's given proof to all by raising him from the dead. Which one makes most sense of design, human life, and Jesus Christ and his death and resurrection?